Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a beer, it's time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today, I wanted to continue a series looking at popular and powerful endgame unique items. Today, we're going to look at something that is definitely powerful, but hasn't been as popular as it deserves to be. That is a unique amulet that drops from the twins, from Heist, and it is Leadership's Price. Now, Leadership's Price is an interesting item. It always drops corrupted, and this meant that it got a massive indirect buff in 3.14 with the launch of the Ultimatum League, and I'll go into that in a second. But ultimately, this is an item that does a few potentially powerful things. But the first thing that needs to be said is that it has a high degree of variance. This here is a perfect roll, with the exception of the 14 to all attributes. I was able to source this in Ultimatum Trade League for the price of 4 Exalted Orbs, and this is a slightly off perfect one that I paid 100 Chaos Orbs for. So, let's talk firstly about the variance in the item. You'll notice when I hold Alt and bring up the detailed mod descriptions that the maximum fire resistance, cold resistance, and lightning resistance lines all scale from -3 to +3. I would suggest that you probably don't want to use this item. Solar Self-Found being a little bit of an exception. You might want to use one that's not well rolled there, just because it's the first one you can get. But I would suggest you generally only want to use this item if these add up to at least +5. So that could be +3 to maximum fire resist, +1 to maximum cold resist, +1 to maximum lightning resist. That adds up to +5. A perfect roll adds up to +9, and that is 1 in 343 to actually source. Ones that have negative total rolls, I would just generally completely avoid using because they're just going to get you killed. This is ultimately a fairly defensive item, but defenses are only good if you've got the resist to back them up, and Leadership's Price is a really good item when it's not sabotaging your resistances, but when it is, it's not worth it. So, that means that basically about 2/3 of the Leadership's Prices that drop you're probably not going to want to use, and then the best 1/3, you're going to ultimately want to get one that looks like this, +3, +3, +3. That's only practical if you're in a trade league, but it should be affordable. At least going by the way that they're priced in Ultimatum. I think I mentioned I paid 4 exalts for this one here. So, what else do we have? We also have some variants on the attributes line, 10 to 16. Again, you can't Divine Orb this, you can't Blessed Orb it, because it always drops corrupted. So that means that you're stuck with what you get. 14's okay, but even 11's okay as well. Ultimately, you'd like that to be 16, but it's not as important as the resist. Now we have the effects that are the reason you want to use this item. So firstly, you cannot ignite, chill, freeze, or shock. That makes this item completely dead for a considerable number of builds. If you're playing a build that is looking to do damage with ignite, then this is useless to you. Likewise, if you're looking to use Herald of Ice, Herald of Thunder, Impulse's Broken Heart, any of these sorts of effects, Leadership's Price is just not something that you would consider. But, in exchange for the inability to ignite, chill, freeze, or shock, you gain Scorching Conflux, Brittle Conflux, and Sapping Conflux, while your 2 highest attributes are equal. Attributes are Strength, Dexterity, and Intelligence. So ultimately, this is imposing 2 limitations. Firstly, you're going to need to fiddle around with stats on gear somehow to get these equally, to get these 2 to be equal. Secondly, you can't use Leadership's Price in conjunction with attribute stacking builds. So you can't use this effectively in conjunction with, say, a dexterity stacking bow build or a strength stacking fire damage build. You're going to need to be able to balance 2 attributes, which can be a little bit tricky. However, the unique belt Cyclopean Coil offers more support for doing something like this anyway. Now, what do you receive with this? Scorching Conflux, Brittle Conflux, and Sapping Conflux are not very well explained in-game. So what they do, in fact, even as you hold Alt on the item and you see that you can't actually see what they do. Scorching Conflux means that all of your damage is capable of inflicting Scorch as though it was fire damage. Normally, your damage can't inflict Scorch. Normally, fire damage would inflict Ignite, but there's a number of ways that you can change the ability away from Ignite and towards Scorch. And Leadership's Price, obviously, is one of them. But Leadership's Price allows all of your other damage. It doesn't need to be fire damage. It can inflict Scorch as well. All of your damage can inflict brittle on enemies as though it was cold damage, and all of your damage can inflict sap as though it was lightning damage. So that means that you can use this on something like a physical impale build and gain access to some sort of elemental ailments to inflict on enemies. So what do Scorch, Brittle, and Sap do? Because they're not something that's explained on the item, unfortunately. Scorch lowers an enemy's resistances. A massive, massive Scorch will lower an enemy's resistances by 30%. So that's equivalent to a shock that would reduce an enemy, that would increase damage taken by 50% on an enemy. This is a pretty significant bonus if you're dealing elemental damage, and so you can certainly get some good value out of that. Next, you have Brittle Conflux. Brittle Conflux's numbers are half of what Scorches are, so a hit that would be hard enough to shock an enemy for 50% will inflict 15% for Brittle. And what it does is it causes enemies to have plus that percent chance to suffer a critical hit. So that means that if you attack an enemy with a skill, or attack or cast a spell at an enemy, and you would normally have a 40% chance to inflict a critical hit, but that enemy is suffering from Brittle with 12%, then instead of a 40% chance to critically hit, you have a 52% chance to critically hit. Brittle is fairly useful without being amazing. It's something that sort of adds up on a lot of builds, but it's not something that would be good enough to use this item on its own. The last one, though, I think is, and that is Sapping Conflux. Sap is an ailment that that reduces the amount of damage that enemies deal. It scales up as high as 20% if you can do a massive, massive, massive hard hit on an enemy. But in practice, you'll probably find that it will be more like 10 to 14% against map bosses and against higher tier bosses like Shaper, and more like 14 to 16% against tanky rare monsters in maps. So that's the way that that's the three things that Leadership's Price does. Of course, in addition to its altering your maximum resistances. So all of this has been talking about what the item does. This item did this in 3.12 in the Heist League when it came out, and it wasn't used. This item did this in 3.13 in the Ritual League, and it wasn't used. What changed? What changed was the introduction of the Tainted Oil. So, because this item always drops Corrupted, it was unable to ever receive one of the powerful amulet anoints by any means at all in the game, until the Tainted Oil was added. Tainted Oils drop from blighted maps that are corrupted. They're pretty rare, but they're certainly available in a trade league, and if you corrupt all of the blighted maps that you get, you'll eventually find some yourself, even in solo self-found. Tainted Oils allow you to apply an amulet anoint to an item that is already corrupted. This is extremely powerful and can enable you to put something onto Leadership's Price that otherwise couldn't be there. I picked up this Leadership's Price here, the perfectly rolled one that you see. Someone had already anointed it with Assassination. Now, I don't know if I'm going to stick with Assassination on it. I've got a new build in mind that will end up using Leadership's Price, but I'm going to have to play around with that and decide whether I want to use Assassination or something else. But if I want to change it, all it's going to cost me is a Tainted Oil plus the usual costs of the anoint that I want to use. And this just provides a lot more power to an item that was already almost good enough in the Heist League, but that just needed that extra little something in order to get it over the line. How do you get this item? You get it with 100% drop rate from Contract the Twins, which is a unique heist. In order to be eligible to have the Contract the Twins drop for you, you need to have completed a chain of heists that includes the rescue, the negotiations, and I think it's called O Fortuna that starts it. But basically, if you do all of the quest heists that you find while you're leveling up, or even you can start now, they'll drop from the smugglers' caches in maps. As long as there's at least one quest heist you've never done, there'll be 100% drop rate to get at least one of them every time you find a smuggler's cache. And then ultimately, once you've done all of the prerequisites, Contract the Twins will be added to the list of things that can drop for you in smugglers' caches. It's pretty rare without being overwhelmingly rare. I think you might get it maybe once every 100 or 150 smugglers' caches. I've had 2 of them drop for me in this league, but ultimately, if you don't want to try and find it yourself, there's plenty of them in circulation in the Trade League. You'll then need to go and kill Vinny and Vicario Vox, which is Not a very difficult fight, although it can be quite long. They've got high stats, but they're just not overly powerful. Anyways, that's all I've really got on this item. This is something that had really flown under the radar because the buffs to it that took place just via the introduction of the Tainted Oil really do transform the item and make it into something else, something a lot better than it used to be. If you've got any comments or questions, definitely fire away below. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it there. I hope you have a good one, and I will soon be putting together a build that may actually just be using this item. May your Divine Orbs have interesting results.